Thank you very much for including me in this program, in the conference, and making possible my participation, my remote participation. So I cannot travel, I don't have a passport, so I don't have the possibility, the legal possibility to leave German territory. That's why I can only contribute to the conference via this connection. So I thank you all again to... hello, I can also see the audience. Hi, hello. Yes. I will present today. My presentation is about EU-Turkey refugee deal, and it will be a critical assessment of this deal. And as you can see, the title of my presentation is EU-Turkey refugee deal. This is not a pipe. It refers to the drawing of René Magritte, a Belgian artist, and the title of this drawing is La trahison des images, and it's about the false perceptions of an image and the denial of the reality. So an object doesn't depend that much on its name, and therefore one can find another one that suits it better. So that I try to challenge that the EU-Turkey deal, refugee deal, is a solution because it's called as a solution to a so-called crisis, and then it's called that is a legal agreement. So I try to challenge those perceptions, and I try to propose you another view on the reality. So my aim is to initiate a critical discussion, and as you probably all know, the EU-Turkey refugee deal is agreed on 18th of March 2016 between European Union heads of state and the government of Turkey, and I am originally from Turkey. I will first briefly present the deal and talk about how the deal is implemented, because it's now more than 3 years that the deal is implemented. My contention is that the EU-Turkey deal works on the principle of non-respect for the rule of law. I will mention some manifestations of this dynamic against the rule of law and talk about the denial of the judicial review of the EU-Turkey deal by the Court of Justice of the European Union. And I will talk about the legal basis of the deal, because the deal is based on the assumption that Turkey, the rule the overthrown, is a safe country. So the EU-Turkey refugee deal, as you all know, was presented as a solution to a refugee crisis, and it was designed to reduce the number of the migrants. So it was the objective of the deal. So the objective of the deal was not respect of the rights of refugees. And Turkey, and it was agreed to put to an end to a long summer of refugee crisis. If we just very briefly remember what was agreed with this deal, all new irregular migrants or asylum seekers whose application have been declared inadmissible crossing from Greek islands to Turkey will be returned to Turkey. For every Syrian being returned to Turkey from the Greek islands, another Syrian will be resettled. It's called one-to-one rule. And Turkey will take any necessary measures to prevent new sea and land routes for irregular migration from Turkey to EU. After 3 years of implementation, there are regular assessments of the European Commission of the implementation of the agreement. On the slide, you see the assessment for the third year of implementation. It's interesting, the language adopted in those reports and the priorities of the EU Commission. It demonstrates that the capacity of the non-respect of the migrants' human rights is openly exhibited as a success of the deal. So the deal is called as a game changer. This is the terminology of the Commission, European Commission, because the arrivals decreased and this is the success of the deal. And the resettlements, you can see that it's the steady pace. It's over 20,000 Syrian refugees resettled from Turkey, and 10 EU member states have not resettled any Syrian refugees. So you can see that concerning the resettlement objective, it's a big failure. And according to the Commission, it's for political reasons or due to their non-participation in Schengen. 10 EU member states are refusing to resettle any Syrian refugee. And as I just reminded you about the deal, that there is this rule of 1-to-1, so there are also returns to Turkey. The Commission is not very happy with the rate of these returns. It's very slow. And it's a bit more than 2,000 migrants returned. And despite the changes in the Greek law, because in order to enable faster returns and bigger numbers, the Commission forced Greece to change their migration legislation, but I don't have time to elaborate on that point. This is the way the Commission, European Commission, assess the implementation of the deal. And if we see the assessment of the NGOs working on migration, how they assess the implementation of the deal, they in March 2019, after the third year of implementation, they also 25 NGOs they released a report. And what they point out is that more than 10,000 people are still forced to live in inadequate reception and identification centers built for a maximum capacity of half this population. While the number of asylum applications across Europe has dropped over the last 3 years, since it's presented here as a game changer, the number of asylum applications filled in Greece has increased extraordinary. In Lesbos alone, for instance, the number of asylum applications more than tripled since 2016. So there is a completely another assessment and another image of the implementation of the deal. The report, the regular report of the Commission is also underlying the voluntary returns, and according to the official numbers, since the beginning of 2016, around 15,000 migrants have returned voluntarily from both the Greek islands and mainland. But according to the European Council on Refugees and Exiles, is an umbrella organization of NGOs, this is the poor reception conditions who trigger the so-called voluntary returns. And the Turkish Directorate General for Migration Management has stated that 215,000 Syrians have opted for voluntary return. 215,000 Syrians. However, human rights organizations have documented cases of arbitrary detention and deportation of Syrians from different cities of Turkey, and the reports corroborate allegations of coercion into signing voluntary returns documents. And the pre-removal detention is a persisting problem in Turkey, and the judicial review of detention orders remains ineffective. So it's very suspicious. There are suspicions, and we don't know really whether those returns are really voluntarily. And we have all the reasons to have our suspicions about this subject. So I will talk about how this deal is working according to a mechanism that is completely against the rule of law, against the European rule of law. And I have to talk about the decision of the European Court of Justice of the EU, and it's a non-decision of a non-EU deal. It's again, ceci n'est pas une pipe. So it was, the deal is challenged before the Court of Justice of the European Union through the application of 3 asylum seekers staying in refugee camps in Greece, who risk to be returned to Turkey. The applicants challenged the legal nature of the EU-Turkey deal. We are calling this deal, as a legal scholar, I consider this as a deal, but it was only a press statement. So the applicants challenged the legal nature of this EU-Turkey statement, and they consider that EU-Turkey statement constitutes an agreement between the European Council and Turkey. And they claim that their rights are adversely affected because of this agreement, and they request the court to annul the deal. And the Court of Justice of the EU has to determine the deal's authorship. Was the statement or the deal a measure adopted by an EU institution? If the court answered yes to this question, it would have also been expected to test the compliance of this statement or the deal with human rights standards of the EU. But the Court of Justice of the EU ruled that the EU-Turkey statement is a non-EU agreement. In fact, it is a European agreement between EU member states and Turkey, which was made at the European Council's meeting held in March 2016. So the court decided that lacks action to review the deal. If we accept the reasoning of the Union, we have to admit that EU-Turkey statement or deal constitutes a form of crisis-led policy making, and it falls outside and it challenges EU treaty framework. So as many other legal scholars, I think that the court adopts a strategy for rendering inapplicable the democratic checks and balances that are otherwise applicable to the EU international treaty making. Human rights are dispensable as regards to refugees and migrants. They are excluded, according to that decision, they are excluded from the scope of the European rule of law. EU-Turkey deal is also challenged before another European Court of Human Rights. The applicant is a Syrian asylum seeker who came to Greece from Turkey. So the court will investigate whether the conditions for the detention of the asylum seeker, the procedures for his access to asylum in Greece and his return to Turkey are compatible with Greece's responsibility under the European Convention on Human Rights. And the allegations is the breach with the prohibition of collective remedy, and the case is still pending before the European Court of Human Rights. So another point that I want to raise is the legal basis of the deal. The refugees and migrants are returned to Turkey thanks to the presumption that Turkey is considered as a safe country. The deal's legal basis is Turkey is a safe country, but it's not a pipe. I argue that Turkey. The deal has a very uncertain legal basis, and it's based on this assumption of Turkish basis. As a Turkish citizen, I am exiled in Germany, like many other thousands of Turkish citizens. So Turkey is even not a safe country. So the assumption that Turkey is a safe country for the non-citizens, it means that the EU member states consider that a country where the rule of law has been completely dismantled can offer legal security. It means that there is a new interpretation or definition of rule of law. And if we look more closely to the legal regime governing the state in Turkey, cannot be considered as a safe country for refugees because Turkey does not apply the Geneva UN Refugee Convention to non-Europeans. Turkey has a geographical limitation to Geneva Convention, and the migrants returned according to the EU-Turkey deal cannot have refugee status and refugee protection in Turkey. They are covered under the so-called temporary protection regime in Turkey, and this temporary protection regime falls short of those stipulated in Geneva Convention. And normally it's an exceptional regime of temporary protection, suitable only for a limited time, has become the permanent legal regime since more than 8 years for Syrian refugees in Turkey. So I will talk a bit about the very recent events that affecting also Syrian refugees. As you probably know, in September 2019, Turkey announced a proposal for repatriation of Syrian refugees and a creation of a safe zone in northern Syria. And northern Syria was controlled by the Kurdish YPG militia. So here in the photo you see the Turkish President Erdogan's address at the UN General Assembly in September 24th. And with the map he is explaining the 32-kilometer deep and 480-kilometer long safe zone inside Syria. Syrian refugees will be resettled from Turkey. And he added, if we can extend the depth of this safe zone to Raqqa and Dar ez-Zor line, we can increase the number of Syrians who would return from Turkey, Europe, and other parts of the world. So he's proposing that he will invade Syria, northern Syria, and then resettle the Syrians, return the Syrians who are actually living in Turkey in this yellow and in this the north part of the yellow zone. And he is asking if you give me the possibility to invade more, then I can even return the refugees in Europe to these parts of Syria. And as you know,
2 more minutes, if that's okay.
Okay. So you know that in October 2019, Turkey started a military operation in northern Syria. And human rights organizations are alarmed and warns that the safe zone can become a death trap like Srebrenica in 1995. An Amnesty International report, it's released today, say that Syrians were illegally deported into war even before this starting the safe zone. So if I conclude, since I have, I think, only 1 minute, the deal, the EU-Turkey deal and the way it's implemented are in explicit breach with EU member states and Turkey's obligation under international refugee law and international human rights law. EU-Turkey deal that establishes a regime where Turkey's authoritarian, European illiberal and liberal sovereign practices converge and function with harmony against the rights of migrants and refugees. And this illegal deal is implemented with the approval of Turkey's and EU member states' citizens. EU-Turkey deal represented as a solution is not a solution. EU-Turkey deal is not a legal text but an illegal agreement. EU-Turkey deal that established this shameful regime should be ended. I think I'm out of time and I can conclude with this word. I thank you all for your patience. Greetings from Berlin.